Okay, so the first topic in the Atlantic slave trade course is looking at why people from West Africa were forced to work as slaves in the Caribbean. And we're going to use this Jamboard to explain things. So, first things first, if we're looking at the top, the 12 o'clock position, in Europe there was a huge demand for sugar in the 1700s, and there was a massive amount of money that could get made with the sugar. So that was the first reason why people thought, okay, what we want to do is to have people producing sugar. So then we're thinking about, well, if we've got the British in the Caribbean on islands like Jamaica, why can't we just have the Native Americans, the so-called Arawaks, working? Well, that sounds a great idea until you realise that they all died out from diseases such as smallpox and even just the flu and common colds that have been brought over by the Europeans over the years. So all the Native Americans had died out. So there was nobody in the Caribbean that was capable of growing sugar on the sugar plantations. So the next solution that people had was, well, might we be able to pay or have people working in the Caribbean in effect for free? Now that sounds quite a bizarre idea, but I want you to imagine a situation where you're living in Britain and you're starving, you've got no money at all. So in an act of desperation, you might say to a wealthy individual, I am willing to work for you for free in order to avoid starvation for a fixed period of time, and at the end of that fixed period I'll be rewarded by you. This is called a bonded servant or an indentured servant. So quite significant numbers of British people actually volunteered to go out to the Caribbean to work for free, and they got given some land at the end of the time working on sugar plantations. But they found the work on the sugar plantations so bad that as soon as they'd finished their bonded period of work, they left the plantations and moved to the urban areas. So, our next solution, well, why don't we get criminals to do the work? So, in Britain, one punishment in the 1700s was to be transported to the Caribbean and forced to work on the sugar plantations. Those criminals that survived the time on the plantations, as soon as they were free, just like the bond servants, they said, in effect, stuff it. We don't want to work on the sugar plantations. It's far too hard for us, and we're going to go to the urban areas that we're starting to grow up. So we've got this massive labour problem. And then the British started to look around and thought, well, who could we force to work on our plantations? They said, I know, we'll take people from Africa. Now, this is all down to racism. There was a belief in Britain and other European countries that the African people had no culture. Now, this was largely based on the fact that the Africans followed different lifestyles to the Europeans. Okay, they spoke a different language, they might have dressed differently, they had different societies, and probably quite importantly, they weren't Christian. So the racist belief was, okay, it's fair enough to force these barbaric people to work on the plantations. The final reason why Africans were deemed to be ideal to work on the plantations is all down to another aspect of racism and the belief that people from Africa were used to hot, humid climates, and these were the only people physiologically strong enough to work in the Caribbean, where it's very warm, very muggy, and the actual physical work of growing sugar was immensely hard. So the British thought, okay, West Africans, these are the ideal people to work. So what we've looked at are 6 different reasons that help to explain why Africans were deemed to be the best people to work in the Caribbean as slaves.